can hit me again after. Just let me play.
What happened in the next 3 minutes changed everything. Not just for Frank, not just for the billionaire who owned this house, but for a dead woman's 30-year search that was about to end in the last place anyone expected. This is how a janitor in a torn blue polo sat down at a dead woman's concert grand with blood on his hands and cracked open a secret that had been buried since 1968.
Make sure to subscribe and like the video. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you for being here, and God bless you.
Frank Malone's alarm went off at 4:50 every morning. Every morning he was already awake. He had been waking before the alarm for 30 years. It was a habit left over from the mill, where first shift started at 5:30, and being late meant someone else got your spot. The mill had been closed for 22 years. The habit stayed. Habits are like that. They outlive the reason you started them. He dressed in the dark, same clothes every day. Khaki work pants from the discount store off the highway, a white undershirt, the faded blue polo with the Whitfield Estate logo on the breast pocket, a small embroidered W inside a laurel wreath. Before he left, he did the same thing he did every morning. He touched the silver locket hanging from the nail by the door. He did not pick it up. He did not open it. He just touched it, the way a man touches a door frame for luck, or a soldier touches a saint's medal before stepping out. "Morning, Mama," he said, to nobody. The locket had been his mother's, his adoptive mother, Helen. She had given it to him on her deathbed 6 years ago, and she had told him something he still had not fully understood. "This was around your neck the night they brought you to us," Helen had said. Her voice was a thread by then. Her hands shook when she pressed the locket into his palm. "Your real mama left it with you. I never opened it, Frank. I was afraid of what was inside." Frank had opened it that night. Inside the lid was an engraving, a laurel wreath around the letter W, and a date, June 14th, 1968. On the other side, a photograph, so small and faded he could barely make out the face. A young woman, dark hair, frightened eyes. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea what the W meant. He had carried the locket for 6 years, the way you carry a question you cannot answer. You keep it close. You stop asking. He parked his truck in the service lot behind the main house. Staff vehicles went out of sight of the front entrance. That was how it worked. He entered through the back door by the utility room. He changed his boots for soft-soled shoes because Mr. Whitfield did not like hard soles on marble. Maggie had told him that on his first day. He had never forgotten it. He filled his mop bucket. He loaded the cleaning cart. He began. The Whitfield estate sat in the hills outside Asheville, North Carolina. 42 acres that Arthur Whitfield had bought in 1987 when the property was a bankrupt horse farm. The house was stone and timber, 12 bedrooms, a library, a formal dining room that seated 24, hallways wide enough to drive a truck through, Frank knew because he mopped every inch of them, and in the east wing, behind heavy double doors with brass handles, sat a room Frank had never entered. The conservatory. He knew what was in there. Everyone on staff knew. A 9-foot concert grand piano on a Persian rug, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Blue Ridge. Eleanor Whitfield's piano. She had played it every Sunday morning and most weekday evenings until she died 7 years ago. Arthur had closed the doors the week after her funeral. They had not been opened since. Every morning, Frank mopped the hallway outside those doors. Every morning, he paused. His hand tightened on the mop handle. He looked at the gap where the morning light came through, and every morning, he moved on. You know that feeling when something on the other side of a wall is calling to you and you cannot explain why? That was Frank's morning. Every single morning for 5 years. In the utility closet where he changed his shoes, Frank had a small metal locker, hook for his jacket, shelf for his lunch bag. On the inside of the locker door, taped at eye level, was a photograph. It was small, rectangular, edges curling. In the photograph, a young man sat at a piano. He was 19. Lean, dark-haired, grinning with the uncomplicated joy of someone who has not yet learned what the world will cost him. His fingers were on the keys, his whole body angled toward the instrument. Frank did not look at the photograph anymore, but he had not taken it down. Some things you keep because you don't want to see them, because removing them would mean admitting they are gone. He closed the locker. He picked up his mop. He went to work. The same way he had gone to work every morning for 5 years at this estate, and every morning for the 34 years before that, at the mill, at the delivery company, at every other job that paid the bills and kept the lights on, and had nothing at all to do with who he used to be. In 5 years, Arthur Whitfield had spoken directly to Frank exactly 3 times. Once to say good morning, once to ask him to be quieter near the study, once to say thank you when Frank found his reading glasses under the library sofa. 3 sentences in 5 years. That was the sum total of their relationship. Frank was not resentful. He understood how it worked. He was staff. He was the man with the mop. He was furniture that moved and cleaned and went home at 5. But there was the locket by the door, and the photograph in the locker, and the music that used to play inside his head that had gone silent 15 years ago. And behind those double doors, a piano that had been silent even longer. David Whitfield arrived on a Tuesday in early October. He arrived the way he always arrived, unannounced, efficient, carrying a tablet with a renovation plan he had already decided on before he walked through the door. David was 48. He had his father's height and his father's sharp blue eyes. None of his father's stillness. David was a man in motion. He had an investment firm in Charlotte, a house with a wine cellar he had featured in an architecture magazine. A quarterly schedule for visiting the estate that he treated less like family time and more like a property inspection. He walked through the house with Maggie beside him. Garrett Briggs trailed 3 steps behind. David made notes on his tablet. Maggie matched his pace, clipboard in hand. Garrett said nothing. Garrett never said anything unless David told him to. "The East Wing," David said, stopping at the hallway. He looked at the double doors. "We're converting it." Dad agreed. Maggie hesitated. A small hesitation, barely a breath, but it was there. "Your mother loved that piano," she said carefully. David did not slow down. My mother has been gone 7 years. Dad hasn't opened those doors in 5. It's a 9-foot piece of furniture collecting dust. He made a note on his tablet. The removal company is coming Thursday. Removal? Maggie said. Not donation? Nobody wants a piano that size. The logistics cost more than most people would pay for it. They'll strip it for parts and dispose of the rest. Rosa heard about it in the kitchen. Rosa heard about everything in the kitchen. She had worked the estate for 18 years. The kitchen was where all information eventually settled. She told Frank during his lunch break. He was eating alone at the staff table, a sandwich from home, an apple, a thermos of black coffee. Nobody else ate at the staff table when Frank was there. Not because they disliked him, because he was so quiet that people forgot he was sitting there. They're getting rid of Mrs. Whitfield's piano, Rosa said. She stood across from him with her dish towel. Thursday. Frank's sandwich stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down. He said nothing, but Rosa saw something cross his face that she had never seen in 5 years. Not sadness, not anger, something older than both. "Did you know she played?" Rosa asked. "I could hear her," Frank said quietly. "When I first started here, before Mr. Whitfield closed the wing." A pause. "She played nocturnes, the slow ones, late in the evenings." Rosa looked at him. "How did you know they were nocturnes?" Frank picked up his sandwich. "Lucky guess," he said. Arthur was in his study when David brought him the authorization form. The study was Arthur's room. Leather chair, oak desk, bookshelves lined with histories he actually read, a window facing the mountains, a photograph of Eleanor in a silver frame. She was caught mid-laugh at something Arthur had said from behind the lens. Arthur signed the form. His hand shook. He did not look at the paper. He looked at the mountains, at anything that was not the words on the page. "Just handle it," Arthur said. "I don't want to be here when they come." He would go to the lake house, drive 3 hours to be somewhere else when the last physical piece of Eleanor's daily life was wheeled out of his house. David took the signed form. He did not notice his father's hand still trembling after the pen was down. What David also did not notice was the locket around his father's neck. Arthur wore it under his shirt every day, a silver locket, tarnished, oval, on a thin chain. It had been Eleanor's. She had worn it until the day she died. Inside the locket was an engraving, a laurel wreath around the letter W, and a tiny photograph of a young woman with dark hair and frightened eyes. Eleanor's niece, Catherine, the girl who had vanished in 1968. The girl Eleanor had spent 30 years searching for. "She's out there somewhere, Arthur," Eleanor used to say. "Catherine and the baby, they're out there, and I will find them." She never did. She died still looking. And now the piano she played while she waited for news that never came was going to be destroyed. Rosa watched Frank for the rest of the afternoon. She watched the way his hand went to the brass handle and pulled back. She watched the way he stood there with his mop, looking at the gap beneath the doors. That is not the face of a man who guesses, Rosa thought. That is the face of a man who knows. But what did he know? And what was he going to do about it? Thursday arrived the way all dreaded days arrived. Too soon and exactly on time. Arthur had left for the lake house Wednesday evening. David was back in Charlotte. The house was in Maggie's hands. The house was usually in Maggie's hands. She was the person who actually ran things while the Whitfields decided things. The removal crew arrived at 8 sharp. A truck with a hydraulic lift, 3 men in work shirts, Tommy Haynes, the foreman. Tommy was mid-40s, shaved head, built like a man who spent his life moving heavy objects, with respect. He walked into the East Wing like a man entering a church. Maggie led them down the hallway. She unlocked the double doors. She pulled them open. The morning light poured through the conservatory windows. It hit the room like it had been waiting 7 years to get back in. The concert grand sat in the center of the Persian rug. Enormous. The dust cover still draped over its body. The tall windows behind it framed the Blue Ridge Mountains in October haze, blue-green ridges fading into layers of mist. The room smelled like old wood and lemon polish and sealed air, the way rooms smell when they have been closed off from the life of a house and left to remember what they used to be. Tommy pulled the dust cover off. Beneath it, the piano was perfect, black lacquer without a scratch. 9 feet of handcrafted precision sitting in a room that had been silent for 7 years. "That's a beautiful instrument," Tommy said. "Yes," Maggie said. It was. Frank was in the hallway. He had been mopping since 6:30. His route had brought him past the East Wing 4 times instead of 2. He mopped the same section of marble outside those open doors with a precision that would have been admirable if it had not been so obviously unnecessary. The crew began. Tommy directed his men to lock the keyboard lid. They wrapped protective blankets around the legs. They positioned the reinforced bolly. They worked carefully, with the economy of motion that comes from doing something hundreds of times. Frank mopped closer, smaller and smaller circles near the East Wing door. The circles had nothing to do with cleaning. Maggie saw him. "Frank, they need the hallway clear." "Yes, ma'am," Frank said. He moved back. He mopped the same section he had already mopped twice. The crew tilted the piano. They slid the dolly underneath. Tommy checked the straps, tested the balance, nodded. They began to roll it toward the door. The wheels hit the marble with a sound that was too loud, too final. The sound of something being taken from the place it belonged. And something cracked open in Frank Malong. Not loudly. A hairline fracture in the wall he had built around the part of himself that used to sit at a keyboard and make the air change shape. The wall he had built when he was 19 years old, and his father had a stroke, and the conservatory scholarship letter went into a shoebox, and the shoebox went into a closet, and the years went by. He heard himself say it before he decided to say it. The word came from somewhere below his chest, from the place where he had stored 39 years of silence. Wait! Everyone stopped. The movers, Maggie, Rosa, who had come from the kitchen to watch, and was now standing at the far end of the hallway with her hand over her mouth. The only sound was the house settling and the blood in Frank Malone's ears. And then a voice behind Frank said, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" It was not Maggie's voice. It was not Tommy's. It was Garrett Briggs. David's man, standing at the far end of the hallway in his black tactical jacket, with his arms crossed and his earpiece glowing, and a look on his face that said this was going to be handled quickly. David had not left the disposal entirely to Maggie. He had left Garrett to make sure it went smoothly. Frank stood in the path of the dolly with his mop in his hand. He knew exactly how he looked. Ridiculous. A 58-year-old janitor in a faded blue polo blocking a professional moving crew with a mop. His hands were shaking. His face was flushed. Garrett walked toward him. His boots were loud on the marble, each step deliberate. The sound of a man who was used to people moving out of his way. "Step aside," Garrett said. His voice was flat. No anger. No emotion at all. Just instruction. "I just need 3 minutes," Frank said. "You need to step aside. 3 minutes. Then they can take it." Garrett stopped 2 feet in front of Frank. He was 6 inches taller and 60 pounds heavier. His shoulders blocked the light from the tall windows behind him. "Mr. Whitfield authorized this removal," Garrett said. He meant David. "You're staff. You don't get a vote." Maggie stepped forward. "Garrett, it's 3 minutes. It won't change the schedule." Garrett did not look at her. He looked at Frank. He looked at him the way you look at furniture that is in the wrong place. "Move," Garrett said. Frank did not move. What happened next took 4 seconds. Garrett grabbed Frank's collar with one hand. He twisted the fabric. He yanked Frank sideways, off his feet, and the mop clattered to the marble floor. Frank stumbled. Garrett's other hand caught his arm and spun him toward the back hallway. "Hey!" Tommy shouted. "Hey, that's enough!" Garrett did not stop. He marched Frank down the hallway with one hand on his collar and one hand on his arm. Frank's soft-soled shoes skidded on the marble. He grabbed at the doorframe as they passed. His fingers slipped. "Let go of him!" Rosa screamed from the kitchen doorway. "Let go of him right now!" Garrett pushed through the service entrance. The gravel driveway was outside. Frank's feet hit gravel and his legs buckled. Garrett shoved him forward. Frank went down on his hands and knees. The gravel was sharp. Small stones cut into his palms. His left knee hit a larger rock and pain shot through his leg. He tried to get up. Garrett's boot caught him in the ribs. Not hard enough to break anything. Hard enough to put him back down. Frank's face hit the gravel. He tasted dirt and blood. His glasses, which did not wear at work, but kept in his breast pocket, cracked under his weight. The silver chain at his collar bit into his neck. "Stay down," Garrett said. "Your shift is over." Rosa was behind Garrett now, shoving at his arm. "You animal! You hit him! I saw you hit him!" "Ma'am, step back." "I will not step back. Maggie, call the police. Call Mr. Whitfield." Frank lay on the gravel. His palms were bleeding. His ribs ached. His face was wet. He could feel the small, sharp stones pressing into his cheek. The morning sun was warm on his back. A bird was singing somewhere in the oak trees by the garden shed. He thought about his father, Curtis Malone, standing at his station at the mill when the stroke took him down without a sound, going down silently the way men of his generation went down, without drama, like a tree falling where nobody was looking. Frank had been going down silently his whole life, every time something was taken from him. The scholarship, the music, his parents, his youth. He went down quietly, and he got back up, and he went to work. But this was different. This was the piano. This was the last thing. He pressed his bleeding palms into the gravel. He pushed himself up. His arms shook. His ribs screamed. He got to his knees. "I said stay down," Garrett said. Frank stood up. He looked at Garrett. His face was bloody. His polo was torn at the collar. Gravel dust coated his khaki work pants. He was a 58-year-old janitor who had just been beaten and thrown out of the house he cleaned every day for 5 years. "You can hit me again after," Frank said. His voice was quiet, steady, cracked, but steady. "I just need 3 minutes." He walked past Garrett.
Garrett reached for his arm, but something in Frank's stopped him. It was not defiance. It was not anger. It was something Garrett had never seen in a man he had just put on the ground. It was certainty. The absolute certainty of a man who has found the one thing he is willing to bleed for. Garrett's hand dropped. Frank walked through the service entrance. His boots left bloody footprints on the marble. He walked past Tommy and his frozen crew. He walked past Rosa, who was crying and reaching for him. He walked past Maggie, who had her phone in one hand and her other hand over her mouth. He walked into the conservatory, and he sat down at the piano. His hands were bleeding. His ribs ached with every breath. His face was swelling above his left eye, where the cut was deepening. The bench leather was cool against his legs. He reached under the bench and adjusted the height. His hands knew the motion, the way hands know how to tie shoes. Some things the body remembers, even when the mind has tried to forget. He looked at his hands, scarred, calloused, the knuckles swollen from decades of gripping tools and mop handles. Blood from the gravel was on his fingers. These were not a pianist's hands. These were a janitor's hands. They had been a janitor's hands for so long that even Frank had almost forgotten they had ever been anything else. He did not think about what to play. His hands decided. They always had, even when he was a boy in the church basement. His teacher used to say that Frank did not choose the music. The music chose his hands. His hands obeyed. He played the first note. It filled the east wing the way light fills a room when you open curtains that have been closed for years. One note, sustained, resonant. The 9-foot concert grand releasing a sound it had been holding for 7 years. The vibration traveled through the bench and into Frank's body. He felt it in his chest, in his jaw, in the place behind his eyes where he had locked away everything he used to be. The first note became a phrase. The phrase became a passage. He played with the technical precision of someone who had trained at the highest level, and the emotional depth of someone who had spent 39 years not playing. Every note carried the weight of everything he had done instead. The years at the mill, the years driving a delivery truck, the years mopping floors, the years watching his father die slowly and his mother die quickly. His own youth, disappearing into the ordinary necessities of being a man who did not have the luxury of being an artist. The music was not fast. It was not showy. It did not try to impress. It was the kind of music that builds the way weather builds, slowly, inevitably, from something small and quiet into something you cannot look away from. Tommy Haynes sat down on the dolly. His body simply lowered itself onto the nearest surface. His crew stood behind him with their arms at their sides, straps coiled in their hands, but no longer relevant. Maggie leaned against the hallway wall. She set her clipboard on the floor. Her hands went to her sides. She was a woman who managed schedules and authorizations and logistics. Right now, none of that mattered, and she knew it. Rosa was crying silently in the kitchen doorway. She had worked in this house for 18 years. She had heard recordings of Mrs. Whitfield playing. What she was hearing now was the same. Not the same piece, not the same hands, but the same thing. The same intention, the same understanding of what the piano was for. The piano was for making rooms remember. 3 minutes became 5. 5 became 8. Nobody stopped him. Nobody moved. Nobody checked the time, because time had become irrelevant. The house filled with sound, the way it used to fill with sound when Eleanor was alive. The absence that had defined every room for 7 years was undone. When Frank stopped, his hands remained on the keys. His eyes were still closed. His face was wet with blood and tears, and he did not move to wipe either. Tommy cleared his throat. It took him 2 tries. "I'm not taking this piano," Tommy said quietly. "Tommy," Maggie started. "Ma'am, I am not taking it." He stood up from the dolly. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "We'll reschedule."
Or we won't. But I am not wheeling that piano out of here after that. His crew was already coiling the straps, already backing the dolly out. Nobody argued. Garrett Briggs had not moved from the far end of the hallway. His fists hung at his sides, unclenched. His face carried an expression nobody on staff had ever seen on it before. It looked like shame. Frank opened his eyes. He looked at his hands on the keys. Blood on ivory. He said to nobody in particular, "I'm sorry. I just needed to." "Don't," Rosa said from the doorway. Her voice cracked. "Don't you dare apologize." Maggie called David first. It was the call she was supposed to make, the one in the chain of command. David was in his office in Charlotte, between meetings. The piano disposal was a line item he had already checked off in his mind. "Just reschedule the movers," David said. "I think you should talk to your father first," Maggie said. "About what?" He signed the form. "About the janitor, and about what Garrett did to him." There was a pause on David's end. "What do you mean, what Garrett did?" Maggie told him. She told him carefully, because she was a woman who understood the weight of words and who was listening on the other end. She told him about Frank blocking the dolly, about Garrett grabbing Frank by the collar, about the gravel driveway, about the boot to the ribs. About Frank getting back up with blood on his face and walking back inside and sitting down at a dead woman's piano and playing music that stopped the house. David said nothing for a long time. "Tell Garrett to stay away from the janitor," David said finally. "I'll handle this when I visit next month." "Your father should know, David. My father is at the lake house. Leave him alone." Maggie called Arthur anyway. She had worked for the Whitfield family for 14 years. She knew which calls to make. She knew which ones mattered more than the chain of command. Arthur listened. He did not interrupt. "He played Eleanor's piano," Arthur said. Not a question. "Yes. And he's good?" "Mr. Whitfield, I have managed this house for 14 years. I heard recordings of Mrs. Whitfield playing. What I heard this morning was the same. It was like she was still here." Another silence. Then Arthur said, "I'm coming back." He hung up. He packed his bag. He drove 3 hours from the lake house on mountain roads with nothing but the radio and a question he could not stop turning over. How did a janitor play like Eleanor? While Arthur drove, Rosa sat with Frank in the kitchen. The afternoon shift had passed. Frank's work was done, but he had not left. Rosa had cleaned his cuts with peroxide and bandaged his palms. She had put ice on his ribs. She had poured him coffee. She had waited. Rosa understood waiting. She had raised 3 children and buried a husband and worked in other people's houses for 30 years. She knew that some stories need silence around them before they can be told. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked. Frank told her, slowly, in pieces. He grew up in a mill town in the Piedmont, an hour south of the Virginia border. His father, Curtis, worked second shift at the textile mill.
came home smelling like cotton dust and machine oil, ate dinner standing at the counter because his back hurt too much to sit. But Curtis wasn't my real father, Frank said quietly. He and Helen adopted me, took me in when I was a baby. Rosa leaned forward. Adopted? A young woman left me at the mill gate in 1968, middle of the night. She was scared. Curtis was on night shift. He heard me crying in a cardboard box. She was already gone. Frank paused. He looked at his band hands. She left something with me, he said. A silver locket. Helen kept it all those years, gave it to me when she was dying. What's inside it? An engraving, a letter W inside a wreath, a date, and a photograph of a woman I've never been able to identify. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question she had wanted to ask since the morning. The piano, Frank. You didn't learn that from a church basement. No, ma'am. By 12, my teacher said I was the most gifted student she'd ever seen. By 16, I was winning state competitions. By 18, I had a full scholarship to a conservatory up north. What happened? Curtis had a stroke, 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave. He was 52, standing at his station on the second shift, went down without a sound. Frank's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. Helen couldn't manage alone. The mill was already laying off. No money for home air, no family to call, just me, 18 years old. Scholarship letter in one hand, hospital discharge papers in the other. You never went. I deferred for a year. 1 year became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became the rest of my life. His mother played piano at the Baptist church on Sundays. Not well, she would have said, but faithfully. Frank started playing at 5 on a donated upright in the church basement, 3 dead keys and a stuck sustain pedal. He sat on a stack of hymnals to reach the keyboard. I kept telling myself I'd go back, Frank said, for a long time. I'd drive home from the mill and think, next year I'll figure out a way. When did you stop? Frank looked at his hands, the same hands that had played the concert grand that morning with blood running down the knuckles. When I stopped hearing the music in my head, he said. About 15 years ago. Used to hear it all the time. Melodies, harmonies, pieces I'd made up. Like a radio that was always on. Then, one day, it went quiet. And I thought that was it. But it wasn't gone, Rosa said. No. It was just waiting. I just didn't know what it was waiting for. At 7:45 that evening, Arthur's car pulled into the estate driveway. He had driven 3 hours. The drive had given him time to think about Eleanor. Not the Eleanor of the photographs. The Eleanor who played. The Eleanor who sat at that piano on Sunday mornings in her bathrobe, with her coffee growing cold on the windowsill. The Eleanor whose music was the heartbeat of the house, so constant that he had not realized it was the heartbeat until it stopped. He found Maggie in the office. Where is he? He went home at 5. Call him back. Mr. Whitfield, it's nearly 8, and the man was beaten this morning. His hands are bandaged, his ribs are bruised. Arthur's face changed. The controlled authority cracked. Garrett did that? On David's orders. Arthur stood very still. His jaw worked once. His hand went to the collar of his shirt, where Eleanor's locket hung beneath the fabric. Call Frank, he said quietly. Ask him if he would be willing to come back tonight. Tell him I am asking, not ordering, asking. Frank drove back to the estate in his truck. He had changed into clean jeans and a pressed shirt. Not because he was told to dress up, because his mother had taught him that. You wash your face and put on a clean shirt, and you go where you are needed. Arthur was in the conservatory. He had opened the double doors himself. He had walked in for the first time in 7 years. The experience had hit him the way cold water hits a man standing in the sun. A shock that is also relief. He was sitting in Eleanor's wingback chair. He had pulled the sheet off and folded it, and sat down the way Eleanor used to sit, angled toward the piano, hands on the armrests, the listening position. Frank entered the room. He stood in the doorway. Clean jeans, pressed shirt, bandaged hands, a bruise darkening above his left eye. The two men looked at each other, Arthur in his tailored clothes, in his dead wife's chair. Frank in his pressed shirt in the doorway with bandages on his hands. Maggie told me what happened, Arthur said. His voice was rough. What Garrett did to you this morning. It's all right, sir. It is not all right. It will never be all right. Arthur's hand tightened on the armrest. I built a company. I built this house. I have a son who employs a man who beats my staff on my own property. That is not all right. Sit down, Arthur said, at the piano. If your hands can manage it. Frank walked across the Persian rug. He sat on the bench. He peeled the bandages off carefully. His palms were raw, red. The gravel cuts had started to scab. Play what you played this morning, Arthur said. Frank played. This time was different. This morning the music had been for himself, a dam breaking. This time he knew someone was listening. This time he played for Eleanor's chair and the man sitting in it, and the 7 years of silence since she died. Arthur sat with his hands on the arms of the chair. His knuckles were white. His eyes were wet behind the wire-framed glasses. He was a man of his generation. He did not weep in front of employees. He had not wept since the funeral. But the music undid something in him, not violently, gently, the way a warm hand undoes a clenched fist. Not by force, by being present long enough for the muscles to remember they do not have to hold on so tight. When the music ended, Arthur did not speak for a long time. Then he said, Eleanor played that piece every Sunday morning. I know, Frank said. I could hear her from the hallway. You never said anything. It wasn't my place, sir. Arthur stood. He walked to the piano. He put his hand on the lid, not the keys. He had never played. That was Eleanor's. But the lid was the closest he could get to her voice in this house. Tell me about yourself, Frank. 5 words. That was all. 5 words Frank Malone had not heard in 5 years of working in this house. 5 words that meant, I see you. You are a person in this room, not furniture. Frank told him. The mill town, the church basement piano, the scholarship, his father's stroke, the years. He told him about the adoption, about being left at the mill gate in 1968. Arthur went very still. 1968? Arthur said. Yes, sir. June, they think. Curtis said the woman who left me was young, maybe 19, dark hair. She ran. Arthur's hand was still on the piano lid, but his face had changed. Something was happening behind his eyes. Was there anything else? Arthur asked. His voice had dropped. Anything she left with you? A locket, Frank said. A silver locket. My adoptive mother kept it, gave it to me when she died. Arthur's hand went to his collar. He pulled the chain from beneath his shirt. Eleanor's locket, tarnished silver, oval. Do you have it with you? Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. No, sir. It's at home, on a nail by the door. Arthur's breathing changed. His face went pale. His hand gripped the piano lid hard enough that his knuckles went white. What's inside it? Arthur asked. The locket. What's engraved inside? A letter W, Frank said slowly.
Inside a wreath and a date, June 14th, 1968. Arthur made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when something he has been carrying for decades suddenly becomes too heavy. And then Arthur Woodfield collapsed. His knees buckled. His hand slid off the piano lid. He went down hard. His hip hit the Persian rug, and his shoulder hit the piano leg, and his wire-frame glasses flew off his face and skittered across the hardwood floor. Frank was off the bench in a second. He caught Arthur's head before it hit the floor. He lowered him down. Arthur's face was gray. His lips were blue. His eyes were open, but they were not seeing the room. Mr. Whitfield, can you hear me? Help! Frank screamed toward the hallway. Somebody help! Call an ambulance! He could hear footsteps, Maggie's heels on the marble, Rosa's voice somewhere calling out. But Frank was focused on Arthur's face. On the gray color spreading, on the shallow breathing. Frank reached into Arthur's shirt pocket. Nothing. He checked his wrists. No medical bracelet. He pressed his ear to Arthur's chest. The heartbeat was there, irregular, fluttering, a bird hitting a window. Maggie appeared in the doorway. I called 911. They're sending a helicopter from the medical center. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes is too long, Frank said. His color is bad. His heartbeat is irregular. We need the helicopter faster. Frank, it's the fastest they can. What if we pay for a private medical transport? There's a private helicopter service at the Asheville airport. They can be here in 8 minutes if they're on standby. Maggie stared at him. That costs $15,000, Frank. Minimum. The estate can cover it, but I'd need David's authorization, and he's not answering his phone. Frank looked at Arthur's face. Gray. The lips bluer now. What Frank did not know, standing on that lawn with his empty bank account and his bandaged hands, was that the locket he left hanging by his front door held the answer to the question that was about to change both their lives. And what Arthur did not know, unconscious in the helicopter with monitors beeping and oxygen flowing, was that the janitor who had just saved his life was the boy his wife had spent 30 years searching for. The hospital was cold and white and smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Frank sat in the emergency waiting room on a plastic chair. He had not changed clothes. He had not eaten. He had driven behind the ambulance. Maggie's car, actually, because his truck would not have made it at highway speed. And he had been sitting in this chair for 3 hours. Rosa sat next to him. She had come without being asked. She brought a thermos of coffee and 2 sandwiches from the estate kitchen. Frank had not touched either. Maggie appeared from the corridor at 11:15 p.m. Her clipboard was gone. She looked 10 years older than she had that morning. He's stable, Maggie said. Cardiac episode, not a full heart attack. They caught it in time. She paused. Frank, the doctor said, another 20 minutes and it would have been different. The helicopter made the difference. Frank nodded. He did not feel relief. He felt empty. The kind of empty that comes after you give away the thing you were holding on to. David is on his way from Charlotte, Maggie said.
He'll be here by morning." "And Garrett?" Rosa asked, her voice sharp. "I don't know where Garrett is, and right now I don't care." At midnight, a nurse came out. Young woman, tired eyes, a clipboard of her own. "Mr. Malone? Mr. Whitfield is asking for you." Frank stood. Rosa touched his arm.
He walked down the corridor behind the nurse, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the squeak of his soft-soled shoes on linoleum. Arthur was in a private room. Monitors beeped. An IV ran into his left arm. His white hair was flat against the pillow. His face had some color back. Not much, but some. "Sit down, Frank," Arthur said. His voice was a thread. Frank sat in the bedside chair. "They tell me you paid for the helicopter," Arthur said. "Yes, sir." "How much?" "It doesn't matter, sir." "How much, Frank?" $17,412, Frank said. It was everything in the account. Arthur closed his eyes. His jaw worked. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. "You spent your life savings on a man who never once invited you to sit down in his own house?" "You asked me to tell you about myself," Frank said quietly. "That was enough." Arthur was quiet for a long time. Then he reached over to the bedside table. He picked something up. It was a tarnished silver locket on a thin chain. Frank's locket. "Where did you get that?" Frank asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "A nurse found it," Arthur said. "It fell out of your pocket during the transfer, when they were loading me onto the stretcher. She thought it was mine." The locket was open in Arthur's palm. The old man's hand was trembling, not from the cardiac episode, from something else entirely. "Frank," Arthur said, his voice cracked, "what did you say was engraved inside this locket?" "A W," Frank said, "inside a laurel wreath, and a date." Arthur reached beneath his hospital gown. He pulled out his own chain. He opened his own locket, Eleanor's locket. He held the two lockets side by side. The engravings were identical. The same W, the same laurel wreath, the same hand that had cut the silver. One locket slightly more worn than the other, one chain repaired with a knot, but the same locket, the same silversmith, the same family. "Oh, God," Arthur whispered. "Oh, dear God." "What?" Frank said. He was standing now. He did not remember standing. "What is it?" Arthur's hand was shaking so badly that the locket chain swayed and caught the fluorescent light. His eyes were locked on the tiny photograph inside Frank's locket. The young woman, dark hair, frightened eyes. "That's Catherine," Arthur said. His voice broke on the name. "That's my wife's niece, Catherine Whitfield." Frank did not move. He did not breathe. The hospital room hummed with monitors and recycled air, and the sound of a world rearranging itself. "I don't understand," Frank said. Arthur was crying now. The tears ran down the creases of his face and onto the hospital gown. He made no effort to stop them. A man of his generation, weeping in front of someone he had never wept in front of before. "Catherine disappeared in 1968, Arthur said, speaking through the tears, each sentence costing him visible effort.
Eleanor's niece, 19 years old. She was pregnant, unmarried, frightened. Her family was pressuring her to give the baby away. She ran. Sir, I don't. She ran, Frank. She took nothing except the locket her Aunt Eleanor had given her, the Whitfield family locket, the one with the crest inside. Frank looked at the locket in Arthur's hand. His locket, the one that had hung by his front door for 6 years, the one his adoptive mother had kept in a drawer for decades before that, the one a frightened 19-year-old girl had left with a baby at a mill gate in the middle of the night. Eleanor searched for 30 years, Arthur said. 30 years, Frank. She hired private investigators. She put ads in newspapers across the South. She played that piano every single day. And every single day she said the same thing to me. Arthur's voice went to a whisper. She said, "Somewhere out there, Arthur, Catherine's child is growing up without knowing who they are, and I will find them before I die." She didn't find them, Arthur said. She died 7 years ago, and I closed the piano room because I could not bear to sit in that chair and hear the silence where her music used to be. The music she played while she waited for news that never came. The monitors beeped, the IV dripped, the fluorescent light hummed. "Your mother was Catherine Whitfield," Arthur said. "You are Eleanor's family, Frank. You have been mopping the floors of your own family's house for 5 years." Frank sat in the bedside chair. He had not moved since Arthur told him. He had not spoken. He had not cried. He was in the place beyond crying. The place where the body shuts down all the small responses because the big ones are too enormous to process. The locket was in his hand. His locket. The one with Catherine's photograph. The one his birth mother had left around his neck in a cardboard box at a mill gate 58 years ago. "She left me at a mill," Frank said finally. His voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. "A cardboard box. Middle of the night." She was 19, terrified. Her parents wanted her to give the baby to the county. She loved that child too much to let the system have him. Arthur's voice cracked again. "She loved you enough to put you somewhere safe. A mill gate where a good man was working. She watched from across the road until Curtis found you." "How do you know that?" "Because Eleanor found Catherine's diary in 2003, hidden in the attic of Catherine's parents' house after they died. She wrote about it. She wrote about leaving you at the mill, about watching a big man with rough hands pick you up and hold you against his chest and say, 'Well now, who left you here, little fella?'" Frank closed his eyes. He could hear Curtis's voice, that deep, patient rumble. "Well now, who left you here, little fella?" He had heard that voice every night of his childhood. The voice that read to him. The voice that called him son. Frank and Helen were good people, Frank said. "The best," Arthur said. "They raised you right. Eleanor would have been grateful to them beyond words." "What happened to Catherine?" Frank asked. He was not sure he wanted the answer. Arthur was quiet for a moment. "She died in 1971, 3 years after she left you.
She was living in a boarding house in Roanoke, Virginia, working at a laundry. She caught pneumonia and didn't go to the hospital until it was too late. His voice dropped. She was 22 years old. Frank opened his eyes. The ceiling of the hospital room was white and blank and held nothing. She never came back for me, he said. She couldn't, Arthur said. She was afraid that if her parents found out where you were, they would take you from Curtis and Helen. She stayed away to protect you, and then she ran out of time. The room was quiet for a long time. 2 men in a hospital room at midnight, a billionaire in a bed, and a janitor in a chair. A family that had been separated for 58 years and reunited by a piano and a beating and a locket and a $17,000 helicopter ride. Eleanor searched for you for 30 years, Arthur said again. Every single day she played that piano, she was thinking about Catherine's child.
About you. She had a private investigator named Henderson. She had files 3 inches thick. She tracked every adoption record in 4 states. But I was never in the system, Frank said. No, Curtis and Helen never filed adoption papers. They just took you in, off the books. No paperwork, no trail. Because nobody asked, Frank said. Because nobody asked. Arthur shook his head slowly. You were invisible, Frank, from the very beginning. Frank looked at the locket, at Catherine's face, his mother's face, the face of a 19-year-old girl who loved her baby enough to leave him at a mill gate and watch from across the road, and then disappear into a life of laundry and loneliness and pneumonia at 22. She was beautiful, Frank said. She was, Arthur said. She looked like Eleanor, the same eyes, the same way of holding her head when she listened to music. Frank's hand went to his own face, the bruise above his eye, the scrapes from the gravel, the face he saw in the mirror every morning, that he now understood had always carried pieces of a woman he had never met and a family he had never known. 5 years, Frank said. I mopped your floors for 5 years. I stood outside that piano room every morning, and I felt something, and I never knew what it was. It was home, Arthur said. You were feeling home. Arthur gripped Frank's hand. The grip was weak from the cardiac episode.
But it was there. The hand of a man who had built an empire, reaching for the hand of a man who mopped floors. Family. Eleanor would have found you, Arthur said, if she had lived 1 more year. Henderson was closing in on records in the Piedmont region. 1 more year, Frank. She's been gone 7 years, Frank said. Yes. And the piano has been silent 7 years. Yes. Frank looked toward the window. The first gray light of dawn was breaking over the mountains, the Blue Ridge, the same mountains he saw every morning through the conservatory windows while he mopped the hallway outside. I spent everything I had to get you here, Frank said. Every dollar, and I would do it again. I know, Arthur said. You know what that means, sir? It means when I get back to work on Monday, I am the same janitor I was yesterday. Broke, bruised, invisible.
The only difference is now I know who my mother was. Arthur shook his head. No, the difference is now I know who you are. He squeezed Frank's hand. You are Eleanor's family. You are my family. And you are never going to be invisible again. 3 months later. The conservatory doors are open. They will never close again. Maggie had the hinges removed. Arthur's instructions. He did not want those doors closed again. Frank still works at the estate. He still mops the floors. He still arrives at 5:45 in the morning and parks in the service lot and changes his shoes in the utility closet. But his schedule has changed. Every day between noon and 1, Frank plays. Arthur arranged it with a memo on estate letterhead. Frank's lunch hour is in the East Wing. Do not schedule anything in that room between 12 and 1. On Sundays, Arthur sits in Eleanor's chair and listens. He closes his eyes. He listens the way he used to listen when Eleanor played, with his whole body still, every breath measured. The locket no longer hangs by Frank's front door. He wears it now, around his neck, the way his mother wore it when she was alive. Beside it, on a second chain, hangs Eleanor's locket. Arthur gave it to him the day he came home from the hospital. 2 lockets, identical, side by side, the way they were supposed to be all along. Garrett Briggs was dismissed from David's employ. Arthur saw to it personally. The conversation was short. David did not contest it. David did not contest much after the night at the hospital. Something shifted in him when he walked into that room and saw his father holding the hand of a janitor he had ordered beaten, and both men were crying, and between them on the white sheets were 2 silver lockets that told a story David's mother had spent her entire life trying to finish. A music scholarship was endowed, not a small one, enough to send 1 student per year to the conservatory that Frank never attended. The application form includes a question Arthur wrote himself. Have you ever had to choose between your music and your responsibilities? Tell us about that. Frank does not know about the scholarship yet. He will, and it will be one of the few times in his adult life that Frank Malone does not know what to say. Rosa's granddaughter comes on Saturday mornings. Arthur bought a second piano for the library. Frank teaches the girl the way Mrs. Ashworth taught him, with patience, with high standards, with the understanding that music is not a decoration, it is a way of being in the world. I have been thinking about this story, about what it says and what it does not say. It does not say that Frank got the life he deserved. 39 years do not come back. The concerts he would have given, the career that should have been his, the mother he never knew, those are gone. They exist only in the photograph in the locker and the locket around his neck, and the memory of a boy on a stack of hymnals in a church basement. But here is what it does say. It says that some things survive. You can build a wall around the part of yourself that hurts, seal it off, go to work for 39 years, and the thing behind the wall is still alive when you finally break it open. It says that being invisible does not mean being empty. The quiet man with the mop may be carrying something extraordinary. You will never know unless you ask, unless you say, "Tell me about yourself," and mean it. Arthur Whitfield built an empire. The most important thing he ever did was say 5 words to a janitor in a room with a piano. It says that the people who search for us do not always find us. Eleanor searched for 30 years. She died 7 years too soon. But the piano she played while she searched is the piano that brought Frank home. And it says that a man who gives up everything for a stranger is not really giving it up, because sometimes the stranger is family, and sometimes the stranger was always family. You just did not know it yet. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever sealed off a part of yourself because life told you there was no room for it, or if you have ever walked past someone every day without seeing them, leave a comment below and tell us about it. We read every one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who stopped playing, someone who stopped looking, someone who thinks the thing they lost is gone forever. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. There are more Franks out there, more people carrying something extraordinary behind the walls they built to survive. Every one of them deserves 3 minutes. You know, Eleanor Whitfield spent 30 years searching for a boy she never found, and that boy spent 39 years cleaning other people's houses and wondering where he came from. They were in the same house, 5 years, the same hallways, the same piano, the same family crest on 2 lockets that were never supposed to be apart. Sometimes the person you have been searching for is standing right in front of you, holding a mop, waiting to be seen. That is the whole story, friends. Sometimes 3 minutes is all it takes.